Our theme is Outward Bound for the whole year, and I'm very excited about that. Take your Bibles, if you would, and turn to Acts chapter 12. We're doing the whole chapter today because it's a self-contained story, and you really can't cut it into different pieces. Sometimes you can do like one or two verses, sometimes you have to do the whole chapter. But I love going verse by verse through the book of Acts, and we're going to take as long as it takes to get through the book. Today we're going to talk about kings and angels. And as I was just praying about the spiritual realm that is all around us, the problem for us North Americans, not all North Americans, for most North Americans, we are among the people in the world who have the highest percentage of belief in God or higher power. We're also among the lowest percentage of people who have a sense for the spiritual realm around us. We're a very pragmatic culture. And we're very good at rockets and communication and computers and phones and building highways, and we invented all of that stuff, and we're good at that. Most guys can change their own tires and change their own oil, and we're a pragmatic culture. The problem with being a pragmatic culture is we often ignore the spiritual realm. We believe there's a God, and most North Americans in some sense believe in a God. Most North Americans pray. Even those who don't go to church and wouldn't call themselves Christians, almost everybody prays. But having a sense for the fact that this realm, the physical realm, is very real. I'm not one of those people that says this is just imaginary, the real thing is God's thing. No, this is real. We have people struggling with cancer diagnoses in this congregation, and that's very real. We have rain that's been coming down all over California. That's very real. We've got real things happening, and you're sitting on a real chair, and you're a real person with a real blood type and the whole thing. But the source of this is spiritual. Jesus called that source Abba, or Father. And the spiritual realm is the source of the physical realm. The physical realm is very real, but the physical realm is not its own source. And God is always present, and the spiritual realm is always present. Heaven isn't just a place you go to someday. Heaven is around us all the time. And it's up to us to change the way we think so that we can be more open to and cognizant of the spiritual realm. Now, Pentecostal and charismatic Christians get that better than most. There's a lot of Roman Catholics that get that pretty well. A lot of Protestants don't. We have a theology. We have a way of thinking, and we've got flow charts of how things work. This is the order of salvation. You repent, you do all this stuff. We got all these things in order. But the truth is, you can rely on that order and not even need a living God, because you've got all the answers. And that happens in our culture because we're very pragmatic. So today we're going to look at a chapter which is a rather funny chapter. There's a lot of comedy in it. And it talks about the spiritual realm and people just sort of bungling around in it. And it's a lot of fun. So chapter 12. I'm going to give you the high points in chapter 12, and then we're going to look at the focus part for today. And then we're going to talk about it a little bit together. First, we have King Herod killing James. Well, which Herod and which James? There's tons of Jameses and tons of Herods. This is Herod Agrippa. I mistakenly identified him in our men's group as Herod Antipas, as opposed to Herod the Great. There's all kinds of Herods. But this is Herod Agrippa, and he kills James, the brother of John. James, John, and Peter are Jesus' inside circle. Those are the people with whom he is intimate. Those are his close friends. Those are the ones he takes with him to Gethsemane before he's about to be crucified. Those are the ones he takes with him to raise the dead. Those are the three he takes to the Mount of Transfiguration to encounter Moses and Elijah. When he's going to do something big, Peter, James, and John are the go-to guys. Now he's got 12 disciples, 12 students, but they're not all go-to guys. Even Jesus only had 3 go-to guys. The idea that you can have like 150 close Facebook friends is kind of ridiculous. Those people, who's going to show up for you in the hospital? Who's going to really be there? Those kind of people. So Herod kills James, the brother of John, and so knocks off one of Jesus' insiders. And we never hear about him again, of course. We keep hearing about John, who wrote his gospel, book of Revelation, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He keeps going. He ends up in Ephesus, takes the mother of Jesus, Mary, with him, and forms a community in Ephesus called the community of the beloved disciple, and they do all kinds of stuff there. And he ends up on Patmos. That's a whole other story. And of course, Peter continues to do his thing. But James now is taken out. And Herod wants to take out Peter. Just one at a time. If you take out Jesus' inside people, then you can put to death this movement. So Herod imprisons Peter in verses 3 through 5, and the believers pray for him because he's in prison. And Herod intends to bring him out in front of the crowds, just like Jesus was brought out by Herod Antipas, another Herod, after the Passover, to basically get him killed. And he's kind of looking forward to it. The believers are praying. This is the year 44, by the way, and we know that because of what happens at the end of the chapter. So this is about 11 to 14 years after the crucifixion. So it's been a while. The church has been around for over a decade. Peter is rescued by an angel. An angel shows up, pokes him in the side. So this is not just a woo-woo angel. This is an angel with a real finger. Pokes him in the side and releases him from the prison, takes him out. Peter goes to Mary's house where the people were all hanging out. And once again, there's lots of Jameses, lots of Herods, and lots of Marys. This is a whole other Mary. This is a Mary who is the mother of John Mark. Now, Marcus is a Roman name. So he had a Jewish name, and that Jewish name was John, Yochanan, and he also had a Roman name, Marcus. Probably Mary was married to a Roman occupier. So this is a Roman name. Mark is a Roman name. So Peter goes to Mary's house, and John Mark is her son, and there's a bunch of believers there. And he knocks on the door. And then you have a comedy scene, which we're going to look at in just a moment, where Rhoda comes running to the door because there's a knocking at the door, and she's so excited that it's Peter, she leaves the door locked and runs back and leaves him out there knocking. So she goes back to the believers and says, Peter's at the door, and they don't believe her. They say it must be an angel. It must be an angel. And so that tells us a little bit about what they're thinking. Now think about it. Really focus with me here. When Rhoda comes back and says, Peter's at the door, it's easier for them to believe it's a supernatural being than that Peter is back from prison. I don't think any North Americans would think that. We would think it's Peter, or something happened with the legal situation and he got out, or he was let go, or he's on parole, or something. We wouldn't think, oh, it must be an angel. That gives us a clue of the difference in worldview between the people then and now. They assumed a supernatural answer where we would probably assume a natural answer. And this is where we North Americans need to grow, because we often don't have a supernatural worldview. If you've ever been on a mission trip, you realize that most of the world, not so much Europe, Europe's like here, not so much Japan, Japan's like here, but in most of the global south, people have a supernatural worldview, even if they're not Christians. And when they come to faith in a supernatural way. And it's just like a fish going into water for them. It's real easy for them to become Christians because they already have a supernatural worldview. They see a spirit under every rock and everything else, and so when they come to faith, miracles are no problem for them. Talked to a Christian in the global south. I was on a painting crew with Benjamin Rajagukuk from Southeast Asia for a summer. We were working, and he was a Christian from Southeast Asia. We were painting apartments. And I said, we got to talking, and I said, we got on the topic of raising people from the dead. I said, well, I've never seen that. He says, well, I've seen it about 12 times. I said, whoa, 12 times? Talk to me. You've seen people raised from the dead? He says, yes, but the secret is you have to get there really quickly. So I just, but it was like talking about where we're going to get lunch. It was just normal for him to talk like that. And what's really funny is you get Southern Baptist missionaries, And the Southern Baptist Convention doesn't talk about miraculous healing. They don't talk about tongues and interpretation. They don't talk about prophecy. Those are things they don't do in Baptist churches. They kind of cordon those gifts out. But every Southern Baptist missionary goes to the Global South, and they come back with stories, which they don't tell their Southern Baptist churches, but they tell me. You know, do you know what happened to me when I was this showdown with the witch doctor and stuff happened? And yeah, it's really interesting about worldview. So we're going to talk about that. Herod then sentences the guards to death because they were watching Peter, and he got out, and they can't explain it. And he heads to Caesarea, which is, you can tell from the name Caesarea, what kind of town is that? What word's in there? Caesar's town, right. This is on the port. And this is a great town, by the way. Caesarea. To this day, we don't know how they did it. The Romans built a port where it was just straight coastline. They built a port in concrete. They poured the concrete underwater. And we still have not equaled their ability to pour concrete. They have a way of making concrete that lasts longer than ours. You know, we got potholes and it crumbles and all that stuff. They were able to do stuff that really lasts. There's a dome called the Pantheon, which I'm going to show you in a second. It's part of the story. In Rome, that's 2,000 years old. They made a special kind of light concrete for the dome. For centuries, biggest dome in the world, it's still in perfect condition. And you can go see it in Rome. So he heads to Caesarea, and then Herod is eaten by worms. I told you this is a comical chapter. There's a lot of lightheartedness in it. And Peter, we'll talk about Peter in a second. But here's the Pantheon, and that's the dome on the top that is still there in perfect condition. My son and I have been there. There's a McDonald's right across the square from there. We sat there at McDonald's eating quarter pounders looking at the Pantheon. And it's an absolutely fascinating place. But you see the word Agrippa in there. Agrippa was a very Roman name. And it was kind of like Washington or Lincoln. It's one of those names that had association with the rulers of Rome. So Herod Agrippa, that's not this Agrippa, but this is Marcus Agrippa, who built this thing. It says here, Marcus Agrippa built this in the 3rd term of his office, or something like that. So Agrippa is this Roman name. So you've got Herod Agrippa, who's the king of the Jews, but the kings of the Jews were Roman collaborators. They were in bed with Rome. They were in cahoots with the occupying culture. And so to have a name like Herod Agrippa is like, you couldn't get more Roman than that. And so he's going down to Caesarea because they're having sort of the local Olympic Games at the time. And we know that this is the year 44 because there were some games there in 44. And there's Jewish sources outside of Christianity that talk about Herod dying in Caesarea in the year 44 suddenly. Because people said, you speak like a god. He says, well, if the shoe fits. And he just died right there because the Bible says he didn't give God the glory. And there's Jewish sources that say the same thing. So he died suddenly. The Jewish sources don't mention the worms, but Luke does mention the worms because Luke has a sense of humor. And get your Herods straight. There's 3 main Herods in the New Testament. They're not all the same. I've noticed none of you name your sons Herod, and that's a good thing. It's a kind of a bad Bible name. Herod the Great was the one who was around when Jesus was born. He was the one that killed all the babies under 2 years old because he was jealous that there might be another king of the Jews. Herod Antipas was the one in Jesus Christ Superstar. Prove to me you're no fool, walk across my swimming pool. Remember that guy? And he was the one who helped, along with Pontius Pilate, to try Jesus in the trials. Herod Agrippa was another one, definitely in cahoots with the Romans, and he was the one here in this story. So you got to keep your Herod straight. That's just a little tip here. And what's really funny is Peter, when he was led out by the angel, wasn't sure what was going on. He couldn't tell if it was a dream, or he couldn't tell if it was an angel, or if it was real. And, sometimes that happens. I was so disappointed this week. Who here has had dreams that meant a lot to you, that gave you direction? Well, this one wasn't one of those. Right before I woke up, I was in line with Wendy at a college somewhere, and I had a toasted hoagie bun. And I was waiting in line, and there was people serving tuna up there, and they were going to put tuna on my hoagie bun. I woke up right before I got the tuna. I was so disappointed. I went downstairs and made a tuna sandwich for breakfast. And Wendy said, "What are you doing?" I says, "Well, I was in line in my dream, and I just woke up having to have tuna." And so I did that. But the reason I'm saying that, it actually has something to do with this story. You're in that in-between state. Very often the best time to pray is early in the morning and late at night, because your mind is a little quieter and you're a little bit open. In monasteries, those are the two main times for prayer. They call the morning one matins and the evening one vespers. And you have a time where you pray. Those are the two times where we're not all busy. It's a good time to read your Bible. It's a good time to pray, because we're open to God's presence. One of my favorite poems is by a German author named Rilke. I studied German literature in college. And it's called Du Nachbar Gott, You Neighbor God. He wakes up in the middle of the night, he's sitting in his bed, and he senses God's presence. And he says, it's just like there's this thin screen between the two of us, and if I were to touch it, it would crumble, and he'd be right there. And very often, in the mornings and the evenings, there's that in-between kind of feel, where we're a little bit more open to the spiritual realm. And so Peter thought he was seeing a vision in verse 9. He wasn't sure, kind of going back and forth. And Peter gives me so much hope, because Peter is so goofy. He's always bungling, always goofing up, and yet God says, on this rock I will build, Jesus says, God says through Jesus, on this rock I will build my church. For how many of you does it give you hope that the disciples were such doofuses? If Jesus could pick, these people were not the sharpest crayons out of the box. And Jesus chooses them to change the world, which makes me think maybe he could do some stuff through us. That gives me a lot of encouragement. You don't have to be perfect to be used by God. You just have to be receptive to be used by God. So Peter finally, verse 11, finally came to his senses. I'm going to focus on this part of the chapter. It's really true, he said, the Lord has sent his angel and saved me from Herod and from what the Jewish leaders had planned to do to me. When he realized this, he went to the home of Mary, the mother of John Mark, Johanna and Marcus, where many were gathered for prayer. He knocked at the door. They're praying for him, for goodness sake. He knocked at the door of the gate, and a servant girl named Rhoda came to open it. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that instead of opening the door, she ran back inside and told everyone, "Peter's standing at the door." "You're out of your mind," they said. When she insisted, they said, "Well, it must be an angel." Meanwhile, Peter continued knocking. When they finally opened the door and saw him, they were amazed. He motioned for them to quiet down and told them how the Lord had led him out of prison. Tell James, now once again, this is another James. This is James, the brother of Jesus. I told you there's a lot of James characters. The first one, James gets killed at the end of the beginning of the chapter, and there's another James here. Here's another little piece of Bible trivia. There's no James in the New Testament. You know what his name is? Jacob. Why they translate Jacob as James in the New Testament and Jacob as Jacob in the Old Testament is beyond me. So the Bible translation I'm working on, the Passion Translation, he's Jacob all the way through. So it's the first Bible translation to translate Jacob as Jacob, which I do not understand why they ever picked James for that, but they did. Tell Jacob and the other brothers what happened. He said, this is Jacob, the brother of Jesus. And then he went to another place. So the spiritual realm, seeing behind the physical realm, into the spiritual realm. Now the Hebrews, get this thing in there, right? The Hebrews have three words which I'd like you to write down or pay attention to or just learn or get familiar with. Hebrew spirituality is the spirituality of Jesus. It's the spirituality of the people of Israel. To this day, the Jewish people, their whole spirituality is based on Hebrew. And there's three Hebrew words which I want to walk you through, which will help you understand the spiritual realm. Shemayim is their word for heaven. Mayim without the sh, is water. Shemayim is sparkly water. You ever go for a hike and you see like a lake and you see the sparkles on top of the water? Like at sunset or sunrise, or the light's just hitting it just perfectly? The Hebrews use the sparkles on top of the water to describe heaven, because it's something you can't touch, but it's something you can perceive. It's something that isn't physical. It's something that's dynamic and moving and around us all the time. Heaven is not just a place you go to when you die. It includes that. That is where you go when you die. But it's always around us and always has been. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And the spiritual realm and the physical realm coexist all the time. And heaven is always there. Heaven is present in this room. Heaven is present in your consciousness. And in your prayer time, one of the goals is to become aware of the spiritual realm around us. It's not all just physical. The physical is real, but the spiritual is more real. Your physical body is real, but your spirit, your true self, is more real. Malkuth, which is Jesus' main teaching. Jesus' main teaching was not forgiveness. Jesus' main teaching wasn't love. Jesus' main teaching wasn't going to heaven when you die. Those are all important, and they're all part of Jesus' teaching, but he spoke more about the Malkuth than anything else. The Malkuth is the kingdom. MLK, Melech is king. Malkuth is the royal rule of God. God's engagement in the world. There is not 1 square inch, cubic inch of the world, of the creation, where God is not present and active. God is continually at work everywhere. We say omnipresent. God is present everywhere. So when Jesus talked about the Malkuth HaShemayim, the kingdom of heaven, he was talking about how the spiritual realm from Abba rules the physical realm. Now, if someone is sick, there's nothing wrong with going to a doctor. There's nothing wrong with taking medicine. There's nothing wrong with doing physical therapy. But the first thing you go to is prayer. The first thing you go to is spiritual. And we do it backwards in North America. We go to the doctor first, and oh, by the way, pray because it can't hurt. The spiritual realm is primary. The physical realm is secondary. We need to do work in the spiritual realm. I have a pastor friend in Pittsburgh who defined prayer so well. He says, when I pray, the Lord and I go places and we do things. That's how we define prayer. We go places and we do things in the spiritual realm. We go do work together. We get things done. We have a conversation on the way. So the kingdom of heaven was Jesus' main teaching. The beginning of all of his parables, he says, the Malkuth HaShemayim is like this. This is how God operates in the world. And by the way, you guys are the connectors. Human beings are the connectors between the spiritual and the physical realm. That's what your job is. Your job is to be co-creators with the Lord in working out all of this stuff. This is why you lay hands on people when you pray for them, because you are the connector to the physical realm. Who here has prayed for someone and you felt the power of God go through you as you were praying for the person? That's the power of the kingdom flowing through you. The other word is Shekinah. Shekinah is the cloud of God's presence. Kim was singing, he's coming in the clouds. That doesn't mean he's coming in Oregon or coming on a day that's overcast. Coming in the clouds, the cloud is the symbol for the gateway between the physical and the spiritual realm. What happens when the tabernacle was dedicated? It was filled with a cloud. The Israelites followed a cloud during the day and a fire by night. What happened? Where was Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration? He was in a cloud. And when he went into the heavenly realm, we call it the ascension, he was taken up by a cloud. And he's coming back in a. That doesn't mean he's going up through turbulence. That means there's an opening. There's an opening in the spiritual to physical realm. And he was going through that. Have you ever been in prayer or in worship during music when you start to just sense the cloud of God's presence? And it's not something you can take a picture of. It's something you sense. Do you see where this stuff is really foreign to us North Americans, but it's very central to this story? To angels. You're out of your mind, they said, when they insisted it must be an angel. So here's some practicalities for being more aware of the spiritual realm. Romans 12:2 says, renew your mind, adjust your worldview. Keep adjusting your worldview. We are biased in North America to think practically. Please hear me, there's nothing wrong with that. There's good things about that, but the cost of that is not thinking spiritually. We often think physically, and we think of the spiritual as an additive, which is sort of an optional additive if you need it. You've heard people say, well, Christianity is just a crutch for people who need it. The rest of us just live in this physical world, and Madonna sings about, I'm a material girl, I live in a material world, and all this stuff. And that just reinforces all of that stuff. Renew your mind, adjust your worldview on a continuous basis. Keep asking yourself, this is why Tamara wants to get us in the Bible a lot. Because when you're in the Bible, you're reading stuff written by people who have a spiritual worldview. All of these people assume a spiritual worldview. And the more you spend time in the Bible, the more you become like them. Your worldview starts to adjust to a higher worldview, which is a worldview which includes the heavenly realm. Watch for angels. And I've got a little hint for you. You won't be able to tell if it's an angel, a person, or God. You know why we can't tell? Because in the Bible, Jacob, wrestling with an angel, calls him a man, calls him God, and calls him an angel. He isn't sure. This angel was real enough to poke Peter in the side. May have looked like a person. You may have encountered angels that look just like Robert over here, and all of a sudden they disappear. They don't necessarily look like a heavenly being. An angel can look like, angel just means messenger. In the New Testament Greek, angelos means messenger. In the Old Testament, malach is like a royal messenger. It comes from melech and malkuth. And so you have these people who have a message or a task, and they often are in and out of your life. And you might say, who was that masked man? Was that an angel? Was that a person? Was that God's presence? What was that? And the people in the Bible weren't sure either. Peter wasn't sure if it was a vision or an angel. He finally came to the conclusion that it was an angel. But watch for angels. As a pastor, I often get people who come to me and say, I don't want you to think I'm weird or anything, Pastor, but my car was broken down, this guy appeared, fixed my car with no tools, and I went to thank him and he wasn't there. This happens a lot. Happens a lot. I had one person come to me and said their battery was stolen. And this guy came and fixed their car, and off they went. And when they got home, their battery was still gone, and the car had started. So don't put this stuff on your resume. I see angels. I peer into the heavenly realm. I speak in tongues and raise the dead. I just don't put that on your job interview. But still, because our culture is not really open to that. And I don't know about you, but excuse me, this is not fitting right. My ear must have grown over the week, but watch for angels. There we go. Pay attention to near misses. Who here has had experiences where you almost died? You escaped an accident closely. There's no physical explanation for you escaping it. We had one of those in our car just a few weeks ago. No way our car could have squeezed through that 4-foot spot, and it did, with not a scratch. Pay attention to near misses. Those are often angelic interventions. Some of you drive, I'm sure the angels jump off the front of your car. but drove with someone yesterday. My toes were curled up the whole time. Pay attention to near misses. Peter had a near miss here. He had a near miss with death. He was on death row. And he had a really close call. Pray on the third floor. Paul says, I will pray with my spirit, I will pray with my mind also. You are a three-story being. Your first floor is your physical body. You weigh a certain amount of weight, you've got a certain blood type, you've got a certain DNA thing. Do you know there's more information on your one little cell of DNA than there is on virtually all the computers in the world? I mean, it's just amazing what gets coded on that thing. You are a physical person. The Greeks had a word for that, sarx, which is flesh, which is negative, and also soma, which is flesh, which is positive. Your body's a mixed blessing, isn't it? There's good and there's bad in it. The second floor is your mind. That's the part of you that's listening to me or not right now. And I can tell some of you are struggling with the time zone and your eyes are going like this. You think I don't see you, but I do. I see you up here. That's the part that's making the decisions. That's the part of you that wakes up in the morning and decides what you're going to have for breakfast. That's the part of you that is driving your car. That's the part of you in charge. Psychologists call that the ego. The Bible calls it the soul, or the mind, or the heart. It's your emotions. Everything you feel and experience is the second floor. Your third floor is your spirit. Your spirit is the truest part of you. Your spirit is the part of you that connects with God. Your spirit, if you get prayed for to get filled with the Spirit, is when the third floor opens up and God's Spirit connects with your spirit and big stuff happens. It's not a cognitive, thinking, logical realm. It's a supernatural place. You have a supernatural place inside of you, and all people do. People are born with a spirit. And when that spirit connects with the Holy Spirit, all kinds of great things can happen. But North Americans do not like praying on the third floor. We'd rather just pray on the second floor. But praying on the second floor is hard. You ever have trouble keeping concentration praying on the second floor? Keeping your mind from wandering? Paul says, I'll pray on the third floor, I'll pray on the second floor too. Praying on the third floor happens sometimes when you're in worship. You're sitting here and all of a sudden the music starts to go and you're on the third floor. You're in a different place. And spending time in the spiritual realm gets you more used to being open to spiritual things happening around you. And the more you're open to them, the more they happen, the more they happen, the more you're open to them. It's a virtuous cycle, and you start to sense God's presence around you. So that's what we want to cultivate. Be receptive to words and visions that you get. I am an audio person, audio learner, so I get mostly words. Tamara is a visual learner, so she often sees things. She'll see things in the room that the rest of us don't see. God will speak to you in the way you're wired. You might get words, you might get visions, you might get some of both. Be receptive to words and visions. Those come from the spiritual realm, by the way, and they come through your third floor. So you got to spend some time spiritually with God, just being in His presence for that to happen.